What if we've been reading the room wrong this whole time? We've been conditioned to watch for the loud ones, the people who dominate meetings, cut others off, perform strength like it's a contact sport. We've been taught that power announces itself, that ambition has a sound, that the person winning is always the one talking the most. But there's a type of person who doesn't compete for attention, because they've already decided that attention is a distraction. They don't fight for the last word, because they chose their words so carefully that the last word was never in question. They don't scramble when things go sideways, because they mapped every possible sideways 3 weeks ago and built a contingency for each one. You know what they look like from the outside? Reserved. Maybe even a little disinterested. And that's the whole trick. Welcome to the world of the INTJ, the architect, the mastermind, one of the rarest and most misunderstood personality types on Earth. Only about 2% of the global population carries this wiring, and almost none of them are going to tell you how their mind actually works. So let's do it for them. Quiet is the strategy. Most people treat silence like an accident, something that falls between words when you haven't thought of what to say yet. For the INTJ, silence isn't a gap. It's a tool. A deliberate, precisely deployed tool with one specific function: control. When an INTJ goes still in a conversation, when they let a pause breathe longer than it's supposed to, everything shifts. The other person starts to fill that silence, starts to explain themselves more, reveal more, overextend more. And the INTJ, meanwhile, is watching all of it with quiet, clinical attention. Here's the psychology underneath this. Silence is a form of pressure. It's social gravity. In most conversations, people rush to fill empty space because the discomfort of silence triggers a primal need to reconnect. The INTJ feels that discomfort too. They're not robots, but they've learned to sit in it without flinching. And that ability, that capacity to simply be still while others squirm, creates an almost immediate authority shift. They've already thought about what you said. They just don't owe you their thoughts on your timeline. Always the anthropologist. Here's what tends to make people feel just slightly off balance around an INTJ. They're always watching. Not in a threatening way. In a way that's almost academic, like you're a fascinating subject and they're taking notes. And in a very real sense, they are. INTJs approach human behavior the way a scientist approaches an experiment. They observe without attachment. They catalog patterns without judgment. They notice the tiny contradictions, the moment your face does something your words don't, the way your posture changes when a certain topic comes up, the specific phrasing you repeat when you're nervous versus when you're confident. None of it is lost on them. All of it gets filed. This comes directly from their dominant cognitive function, introverted intuition. It takes in enormous amounts of information, sensory, social, emotional, and synthesizes it into conclusions that feel more like gut instincts than logical deductions. But they're not instincts. They're the result of years of unconscious observation made suddenly, crystallinely visible. That's not suspicion. That's precision. Ice over fire. Here's what people get deeply wrong about INTJs. They assume the calm exterior means the INTJ doesn't feel things deeply. That somehow emotional restraint is proof of emotional absence. This couldn't be further from the truth. The INTJ feels with extraordinary intensity. The difference is they don't let their feelings drive the car. They let them sit in the back seat, acknowledged and real, but not in control. What comes out isn't cold. It's controlled. And controlled is a completely different thing. This is ice over fire. Not an absence of heat, but a layer of discipline that keeps the heat from running wild. And in high-pressure situations, when other people are making decisions fueled by panic or pride or wounded ego, the INTJ's ability to stay cool while burning underneath is one of the most decisive advantages they carry into any conflict. In heated moments, while other personalities get swept into the emotional current, the INTJ stands to the side and watches. They notice who's afraid and performing confidence. They notice who's performing vulnerability to manipulate the room. And later, in the quiet, they integrate all of that into a fuller picture of who everyone actually is. This isn't coldness. It's the most sophisticated form of emotional intelligence, the kind that understands what's actually happening beneath the surface and responds to that rather than the performance on top of it. The invisible curriculum. You want to understand how an INTJ builds the kind of knowledge that makes them formidable? Look at what they do in the hours nobody watches. When an INTJ decides to learn something, they go deep. Not surface-level, YouTube tutorial deep. We're talking weeks, months, sometimes years of deliberate study until they've genuinely mastered it. And they don't talk about it while they're learning. They don't post progress updates or fish for encouragement. They just work. Quietly. Consistently. Until they're genuinely dangerous at it. They read across fields that have nothing to do with their current work, because they understand, intuitively, that the most valuable insights always come from unlikely intersections. A psychologist who studies economics thinks differently about behavior. A designer who studies military strategy thinks differently about space. The INTJ collects these angles deliberately, building an invisible curriculum that compounds in the background every single day. By the time the world finds out they have a skill, that skill is already razor-sharp. They don't show up half-baked. The professional who suddenly seems to know far more than their experience should allow. The analyst who sees the problem before it's a problem. There's no mystery there. There's just a private library that nobody knew was being built. Boundaries with no explanation required. An INTJ doesn't negotiate their boundaries. They don't soften them for social comfort, they don't apologize for having them, and they definitely don't explain themselves to people who aren't owed an explanation. There's no drama when they set a limit. No raised voice. No long emotional speech. Just a quiet, firm, completely unambiguous response. And somehow, everyone in the room feels it. People who try to push an INTJ's limits usually only make that mistake once. Not because of any dramatic reaction, but because the INTJ simply recalibrates. They adjust how much access that person gets. Quietly. Permanently. No announcement, no explanation. Just a door that's now half an inch more closed. In a world where people are constantly testing each other, the person whose limits are crystal clear and completely non-negotiable holds an authority that commands respect without ever demanding it. The long game. Here's where most people fundamentally underestimate the INTJ. They think the quiet ones are just slow. They're not slow. They're strategic. There's a massive difference. INTJs don't get swept up in trends, hype, or the need for quick validation. They're asking a completely different question from everyone else. Not what can I win today, but what am I building for the next 10 years? This means they'll absorb short-term losses without flinching because they've already calculated the long-term gain. They'll let someone else take the credit right now because they know exactly where this road leads. They'll stay quiet when challenged, not because they have nothing to say, but because responding right now isn't worth the position they'd lose by doing it. They'll let someone else grab the spotlight, because they're building the stage. And when the INTJ's long game finally pays off, the magnitude of what they've built while nobody was watching is usually staggering. You can't outpatience an INTJ. It's simply not a race most people are built to run. Dark until done. This is the final move, and possibly the most defining one. INTJs build in the dark. They work in private, refine in silence, fail invisibly, and adjust without an audience. There's no public draft process. No half-formed idea shared with the group for early feedback. No invitation to watch the messy, uncertain middle of creation. By the time the INTJ reveals anything, it's finished. It's precise. It lands with a weight that comes directly from the silence that preceded it. This runs counter to everything our culture tells us. Share the journey, show the behind the scenes, build in public. And there's value in that, for some people. But the INTJ's instinct runs the opposite direction, and it produces something that visible process rarely does. The arrival of something undeniable. A finished thing is harder to dismiss than a work in progress. A completed argument is harder to dismantle than a developing thought. The INTJ knows this, not as a strategy they consciously chose, but as a bone-deep truth about how they operate. Build in silence. Emerge in strength. Let the work do what the announcement never could. The quiet kind of unstoppable. The INTJ doesn't announce themselves. They don't campaign for the room's attention or perform power for an audience. They simply build it. Quietly, methodically, through discipline and depth and a ruthless commitment to thinking further than anyone else is willing to go. Their power moves aren't the kind that make headlines in the moment. They're the kind that reshape the landscape so gradually that by the time the shift is visible, it's already complete. Every quiet moment is a calculation. Every silence is a strategy. Every step back is a setup for a move you didn't see coming. Don't confuse the stillness for stagnation. Don't read the composure as indifference. And never, not for a second, mistake the quiet for surrender. Because right now, somewhere behind those calm eyes and that measured expression, the plan is already 3 moves deep. The INTJ was ready before you walked in the room. They're already thinking about what comes next.